Digital India Summit and Awards 2016 is a pioneering platform aiming to catapult India towards the League of Digitally Enhanced Nations. This summit brought together the industry's finest leaders from across sectors, giving their insights towards making India the center of manufacturing.
Our next session is aptly titled Making India an Electronics Manufacturing Hub, and for this I would like to invite Mr. Amitabh Kant on stage. But first, to put this into perspective, one of the key areas that this government has been greatly focusing on is to make India the electronics hub of the world, with the government's clear vision on it. The days are not far when we will have mobile phones and other cool electronic gadgets made with a Made in India tag on top of it. That is the intention of it. And to reinforce India's commitment to position India as an electronics manufacturing giant, we have, as I mentioned earlier, none other than Mr. Amitabh Kant, CEO, Niti Aayog, for this very special address. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Mr. Amitabh Kant. Sir.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be in the midst of all of you. We are all aware that India is growing at rates of 7.5% per annum. The challenge, however, is to take it to higher levels of growth at 9 to 10% per annum, year after year, year after year, for 3 decades or more, to be able to lift a very vast segment of our population above the poverty line. To my mind, it's not possible for India to grow at those rates for 3 decades unless and until India becomes a manufacturing nation. India's GDP largely comes from its services sectors, almost 60%. Our manufacturing accounts for just 18% of our GDP. We need to create many more jobs, and that can only happen through the manufacturing sector. There are huge perils of India bypassing the process of manufacturing. And economists like Danny Rodrigues have talked about this, that if India bypasses manufacturing, then in the long run, there'll be severe repercussions. So I think the important thing to understand is that if India is to grow at 9 to 10% for a very long period of time, if India is to succeed in several of the programs which this new government has initiated, Make in India, Digital India, Skill India, 100 smart cities, these are all innovative programs. I mean, these are all unique programs which can take India into the next century. But for all of this to succeed, including Make in India, I think the critical component of all this is the Digital India component. If the Digital India component works, then the rest of the thing will enable it to happen. It'll be possible for us to leapfrog in terms of manufacturing in many other ways. So digital technology is India's future. Digital technology is the key to smart urbanization. Digital technology is the key to leapfrogging. Digital technology is the key to success of Make in India. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Now, in continuation with Mr. Kant's address, our next session is aptly titled Making India an Electronics Manufacturing Hub. It's a very special panel discussion, and for this, I would like to invite on the panel Mr. Ajay Chaudhary, Chairman, Electronic Sector Skills Council of India.
Arshdeep Singh, Chief Technology Officer, Carbon.
Mr. Nitin Kunkoliankar, VP, MAIT and Director, Corporate Affairs, SmartLink Network Systems Limited. Mr. Sunil Vachani, Chairman and Managing Director, Dixon Technologies and VP, CEAMA. And Mr. Murali Arikara, Executive Director, Essential Energy India Private Limited. And to moderate this session, Gauri Dwivedi from ET Now.
If we were to just talk about, how far away are we really from that big goal that the government has set for itself, that is zero net import by 2020. How far away are we really from that goal? A quick view from all panelists. Mr. Chaudhary, let's start with you as to how far away are we really from achieving that goal that the government has set for itself? We're just 4 years away from that.
Well, we definitely are far away from it. And however, it's always good to set a high goal. And if you set a high goal, you actually work towards it. So I think that's really what we should all be looking at doing.
Okay, okay. Mr. Panchani.
Yeah, I think we are far, far away from the target. I think there's been a lot of talk about it. I think if Mr. Kant talked about the mobile phone industry, that a lot of the companies in China and all over the world are looking at India and making India as a base. But I think what is holding them back and holding a lot of companies back is the predictability in the policy, right? If you look at mobile phones, the reason that companies came in was because of the differential duty that came in the budget. You know, if someone is importing the phone, there's almost a 12% duty. If you're manufacturing, it's 1%. But I think the issue is that what would happen to this differential duty once the GST comes in? And I think no one has really been able to answer that.
Mr. Arikara, how would you like to come in on this bit?
If you look at what's out there in the market, they say the electronic industry or the market for India is today about $100 billion, and out of which what's produced in India is about 25 to 35 billion. And by 2020, we're looking at about a $400 billion market for India. That's what's being projected. And at that point, we'll probably be doing only about 100 billion will be what we make in India. So $300 billion, which at that point is significantly larger than our total import bill for crude oil. So you can see how this becomes another factor. If you can look at what's happening to the Indian economy, as crude oil prices go up and down, it makes the economy fairly volatile. So now when you talk about this demand that you're looking at, that's going to be a significant aspect for us to look at. And that's probably one of the reasons why the government is focusing and pushing on making sure that we can encourage and enable developing this electronic manufacturing, India's electronic manufacturing hub. From my perspective, there's 2 or 3 aspects that come into play for that. And one of the critical aspects, and I reflect for the entire, not just the manufacturing aspect of it, but if I looked at the whole digital India as a whole, right from the manufacturing to the end user, the lifeblood is electricity or energy.
Mr. Arshdeep Singh, mobile, of course, is really going to be, or mobile production, manufacturing is really going to be driving most of this growth. Your thoughts on what are the top 3 things that the government needs to take care of to get there?
The thing I think more what we need to do is having consistency on policies. Okay. Because as of now, there are certain things which even like the people who are coming with FDI, they are not very clear with the policy. How are they going to be doing the next phase? Because right now, the next phase was pretty good. They have increased the duty on accessories. So that is another thing which has come up in India. So manufacturing is going to the next phase. But as of now, what the consideration is that how do we go about the next phase of mobile manufacturing? So that could be having a blueprint that how the policies are going to work for the next, you can say, next 6 months. And we need to have some kind of a guidelines to that. Because investment and machineries which are coming up in India, they need to be covering the cost of that kind of equipment. So the policies need to be more clear.
Right. Lack of component ecosystem clearly seems to be the single biggest hurdle as far as India is concerned. And is there any shortcut to this that we can really achieve? Because in terms of manufacturing, we really have a very long way to go, Mr. Kunkulan.
We need to build up an ecosystem, obviously, for manufacturing, and mere giving duty differential doesn't make a big impact. Today, you're given duty differentials for mobile, but you're not encouraged the manufacturing of populated PCBs and the components. So many importers or traders have moved to manufacturing. They call themselves as manufacturers, and they just put screwdriver and assemble. That should be prohibited. So we have been demanding that there should be a blanket ban on import of direct populated PCBs, so that at least population starts. And when population starts in this country, there will be a demand for the components. Probably the local component ecosystem could be built up. To build up a component system, encourage the local component industry, incentivize them, abolish CST. Now you manufacture a component in the next state, you can't transport it, you have to pay 2% compulsorily. I mean, make in India import is cheaper.
Taxation is a huge issue that
absolutely. Even there are inversion, except for some ITA products, non-ITA products, there is an inversion of duty because of special additional duty. So there is no clear approach, and I think government has to address that immediately.
Right. Mr. Chaudhary, you want to comment on that as to what is it that the government can do?
First of all, the fabs are to be brought in because there was a clear plan to bring in 2 fabs. Yeah, and I think that needs to be made to happen. Then the other thing is that for the components, we need to do targeting of those components which we need in this country. And those targeted components we need to bring for manufacturing to India. It needs to be drawn in. That effort has to be made by the government to bring those component ecosystem into India. Otherwise, it'll just be, we'll keep talking about it, we will keep importing the components and we will not be able to go forward. So I think that is where the next part is lying. The third part is, the policy is great. I think the policy has been proven to be good. A lot of people have been attracted by the policy. But I think what needs to be done by the government is global marketing of this policy. And this policy is something that if it is marketed correctly, you will see much more investments into the electronic ecosystem here than what you've seen till now.
If you talk about this, as other panelists are also mentioning as to whether or not we should actually be catering to have an export-led growth, or should we actually focusing on the demand that is there, the domestic demand. Don't you think that as of now, the domestic demand itself is so huge that manufacturing could just be catering to the domestic demand?
As of now, huge domestic demand is there. Before going to export, first we need to satisfy what we need right now.
Right.
And like Mr. Bachani said, that going directly to silicon, it is better to achieve the things which we can easily achieve as of now. Now we don't have the capability to make LCDs. We don't have the capability to make camera modules, which are a very much easier part than going into a silicon thing.
Right.
So probably first we need to push the industry and get some people who bring in the ecosystem regarding all these things. The housing is there. We have a lot of painting industries there, which is not at all present in India as of now. So these things are costing more than 50% of the BOM. Other than leaving the complete PCBA or populated PCBA, so 50 to 60% of the BOM material, the bill of material, is these components which can be easily manufactured in India.
Right.
So probably giving an initiative to all these industries would be a much more practical point than getting into PCBA itself.
Right. Mr. Murthy, if you talk about the disability cost, that's anywhere between 8 to 10%, maybe higher. Some of the costs and some of the constraints, of course, are something that all manufacturing activities face, whether it's freight or whether it's power or water. But some, of course, are more central to electronic manufacturing. So what do you think should be done, and what do you think are the single biggest constraints that lie for electronics constraints?
Yeah. So I have a different view of some of the things. What we are talking about is an established market, and we say, here is our need, and this is what we want to do. And to a large extent, what we find is people talking about what our needs are today and how we satisfy and how we meet those needs. While I talk about power from a standpoint of the fact that it's an essential commodity or essential aspect of this whole ecosystem, one thing that I feel which is important to mention is where we sit as a country, the energy infrastructure is not able to meet our demand. And not only is it able to meet our current demand, but also the latent demand that's coming up. So it actually needs a significant change in the architecture of how we do things. And when we are talking about that change in architecture, and when we talk about ecosystem, when I look at electronics, I mean, there are things that we are already doing to meet some demand, but this is going to be the next revolution. Like you had internet and what you're doing and digitization that became a revolution, and it spawned off a lot of different things. energy for India, and it's a very specific, India-specific issue, that's going to create this, because our architecture is going to change from being a central plants to having more distributed with solar, wind, and other technologies. And those technologies are going to need specific electronic components. So you can look at the entire ecosystem of, first, intellectual property creation, which then makes it a very specific solution for India. It attracts other people to come and look at this and say, this is a new solution, that's something different that we need to invest in. And so it starts building the ecosystem from there, rather than looking at it and saying, here's an aspect of what needs that exist today. It's something that allows us to leapfrog and get to that next level.
Intellectual property rights is again a gray area. India doesn't have a great track record as far as IPR protection is concerned, and the patent regime that we have doesn't support a lot of R&D. Mr. Bachani, is that another weak link in the chain?
I think absolutely that's been a bit of a problem. And I think when we talk about manufacturing, we should look at China as a competitor. And when we talk about innovation, we should look at US. Right? How is that US has become the hub of innovation coming out of there? And I think the single biggest factor is that we as a nation do not encourage failure. Right from our education system to our banking to the ecosystem, we don't encourage failure. And unless you do that, you cannot have innovation coming out of the country. But I think those are small steps. A lot needs to be done to really encourage innovation, because I think the manufacturing that should happen in the country should be innovation-led, design-led manufacturing.
Right.
That's going to ensure value addition in the country, and that's what we need.
Mr. Chaudhary, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think the government has introduced a concept which is called Electronic Development Fund. And under the Electronic Development Fund, it's a fund of funds, and that will fund a whole bunch of daughter funds who can then invest in startups or other companies who are actually inside the whole electronic ecosystem. Right. So I think work on that has already started, and the first few approvals have already been done. So I think there is a very clear momentum towards R&D and innovation being supported.
The government's efforts, Mr. Singh, in terms of PMA, the scheme that has come out, giving preference to indigenous manufacturing, how big a boost is that, or do you think that's a very small step by the government?
As of now, it's pretty small, because whenever we are looking for getting into manufacturing, the basic infrastructure costs are too high. And regarding the policy, we don't have a time-based policy. Right. That next 6 months, this is going to happen, another 9 months, this is going to be the policy. So we are not very clear about that. In case we are looking for step-by-step increment in manufacturing or technology investment, we need to have a progressive kind of a planning that, okay, first stage is going to be this stage. We are going to go, like I'm talking in terms of mobile. Initial stage is what we are doing is SKD. And second stage could be CKD, but CKD in what terms? We need to have a clear definition on that what kind of incentives are going to be there for the second phase of investment, what we are going to do. The second phase could be on the components. It could be level 1 components, it could be level 2 components. That kind of things will give very good boost to the industry.
Right.
So we don't have a strategic kind of a planning that how are we going to push the industry to going towards the goal.
Right. Okay. Nitin, do you want to comment on the skills bit first? Let's talk about...
I would take this first, because there's a very different point.
Right. PMA.
See, PMA, the central government has come out with a PMA, whereas 80% of the government procurement in the country takes place in the states, and hardly any state has any PMA in place.
Right.
A. B, in PMA, you need to be obviously competitive, and we accept that as compared to the import pricing, due to the inverted duty regime in many areas, we can't be competitive. I mean, obviously, imports are cheaper and domestic is expensive. Third, unless until there is this PMA insists that 30% domestic value addition should be there at the BOM.
Right.
And there is a phase manner, first year 25, then 30, 45. I mean, that's impossible. So practically, PMA becomes, I mean, it's very difficult to implement that.
Let's talk about the role that states play. We are a federal system. At the end of the day, a lot of the policies have to be decided by states. The center can only give the initial push. Mr. Bachani, are states on board to actually, give the final push as far as manufacturing is concerned?
I think a lot of states are on board, but not all of them. I think we've seen a few states take great initiatives to encourage manufacturing in the country. There are states like Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, which are becoming a hub for mobile phone manufacturing. Right. But I think not all states are on board as far as the Make in India policy is concerned. And I think that's a very important part because, like you rightly said, as far as the PM is concerned, like if you look at the LED bulb tenders, right? The government is purchasing huge amount of LED bulbs and subsidizing it. But a lot of the states that are coming out with tenders do not have the PMA clause. So that's a bit of a problem. So I think having a buy-in from all the states is a prerequisite for Make in India to succeed. We
have time for just one quick discussion point before we wrap this up. That is around the clusters. Auto industry is a classic example of how manufacturing has taken off. It has now just catering to domestic demand, but also exporting. Is that an example that must be replicated, Mr. Chaudhary?
Yes, cluster is a program that the government has also promoted.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Electronic clusters, there are close to about 30 odd electronic clusters have been created. But I think what needs to be done beyond that is that each of the states need to identify the products that they want to focus on in each of these clusters, rather than make it generic. If it is made like one particular cluster is a Taiwan cluster, or one particular cluster is a capacitor cluster, supercapacitor cluster, all those things. So basic thing is that it should be focused on certain areas rather than just being generic clusters. So I think that's where the big benefit of clusters will come in.
Let's end on the note that Digital India could be a $1 trillion economy, and as much as 50% of that could actually be through electronic manufacturing. So we're talking about $500 billion of opportunity. Of course, a lot of challenges lie ahead, but hopefully we'll get there. On that note, we will have to wrap this up. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Thanks a lot.